Where do I have? Where are you calling? Where are you now? Physically?
Yeah. So I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
You're in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Great. We had somebody from London last week.
Oh, very nice.
And the week after we had there's a bagel. There's two bagels left if you want one. It's already split for you, and you have to put the cream cheese on it. Then the week before we had somebody from Boston.
Okay.
And then somebody from New York, obviously. So that's good. So we have a broad base, a range of people. So I guess I don't want to take too much of your time, but first of all, tell us a little bit how you got the first job.
Yeah, so good question. So I'll give you a quick overview of kind of my career and kind of what I've done. So went to Lehigh for undergrad, did the MS in, I think back then it was called financial mathematics, and now the name's changed a little bit. Yeah, so I did that program, and then I went to New York City, worked for CIBC Oppenheimer on the convertible bond desk. So all convertible bonds, I kind of call them bonds and drag. The Cadillac of investment vehicles is what some other people call, but basically a bond with an optionality on the company's stock. So I was doing institutional sales and trading for them for about 4 years or so. Really enjoyed it, liked the people, and then but at the same time, I decided finance wasn't necessarily for me. So I went back to business school, went down to the University of Virginia for 2 years, got an MBA from them. And then I've been in Pittsburgh now the last 6 years or so, working for a metals company, Alcoa. So Alcoa, Arconic, so big metals companies do mostly all aluminum for the most part. And then in the last couple of months, I'm looking to transition to a different job elsewhere, probably outside of Pittsburgh, but I haven't quite figured it out what exactly I want to do yet. So that's kind of a high level of what my career is, where I've gone. So haven't stayed in finance, only stayed in finance for about 4 years. At the same time, kind of have leveraged all that finance background and the math background I got in the fifth year master's program, fair amount, surprisingly. So I guess that first job, so good question on how I got that first job. So I got to think a little bit, but part of it was really two things. One was a combination of just kind of, I did sort of people came to campus, right? I assume they still do. I got a job or an interview I did an on-campus interview, and I interviewed with CIBC in their commodities department in New York, and that went very well, I thought. And then I had done a little bit of networking with some of the people there. I followed up with them. And they moved me over to the sales and trading side, which is not where they were originally looking for somebody from right out of college. But they liked my resume. They thought I interviewed really well. And because I had been doing some networking and talking to a few other people there, they thought it could be a good position. They were on the commercial bond desk and kind of middle market equities area. And so I went back in for another 2 interviews with the desk. I was pretty informal interviews, and I ended up getting a job offer, and that's how I ended up moving to the convertible bond desk. So,
but I'm sorry, you probably went a little too fast. So did you get the job internally, or I mean, did you get it?
No, yeah. So I interviewed. So the initial start was really just an on-campus job interview, and then I went from there. Went to New York for the full round interview, and this was with the commodities group, and that went well. And I talked, and I'd done pretty well in the interview, and I talked to a few people there, had tried to done some networking to meet some other people and better understand what the company was like just in general. And then they actually elected to move me to a different group and interview for a different group, which wasn't originally part of the on-campus interviewing. And that was more the sales and trading group, where they really weren't looking for college graduates or master's graduates, but partly because I had been asking and trying to do some networking there, they ended up bringing me in for a few interviews and hiring me.
Okay. But then somehow you're not in finance anymore.
No, so good question. Yeah, so about 4 years of that, I really enjoyed the finance. I really enjoyed the people I worked with. I really enjoyed my clients. So I had a number of hedge funds as my clients, a couple insurance companies, mutual funds, all institutional investors. And I liked it, but I think I kind of came from a little bit of a manufacturing background. And for me, I wanted to get back more into something with a little bit more physical, tangible aspect. And so really to make that transition, I thought manufacturing was where I wanted to go. And so to make that transition, I went back to business school. And, you know, one of the things I'll say is certainly having the 5th year in finance really helped me make the transition back into graduate school. You already have a year of graduate school. Business schools look very highly upon that. They think it's a good indicator for how you do in a business. I think if you have a 5th year of education and master's program.
Okay. I guess the next question is, what are some of the courses that you took at Lehigh? And that was, I guess, you're 2007, right?
Yeah, 2007 for the master's. Undergrad, I was 2006.
So which are some of the courses that you found help you the most when you start, you know, working in finance at the beginning?
Yeah, so within the finance, so convertibles were pretty interesting because you had all the Greeks, so right, you had delta, rho, and so understanding all of that. That's how the investors really made the decision. So I certainly think, you asked me for classes, but whatever classes you kind of learned, the sort of the Black-Scholes model and stuff like that, I thought was pretty important, at least from a numerical perspective. The other classes that were helpful, there was an options class, I think Professor Greenleaf taught at the time. I found that very helpful just in terms of how the markets generally worked on the options side. A convertible bond, again, is kind of a bond with an option attached to it. So I found that very helpful for finance. I would generally say all the math classes I took from a little bit, if we abstracted about what I really kind of leveraged out of things beyond just the finance area, the math classes, I think, really provide a good framework for how to logically think about problems, whether they be finance problems or I was doing internal consulting for the manufacturing company and then R&D area. And I think the math provides a great background to kind of abstract and provide frameworks for how to think about problems. So from a specific perspective on the finance side, yeah, certainly the mathematical classes where you learned about the Greek, the options classes, and then just math classes in general.
Now, one topic that keeps coming up is that, I mean, they're all studying and want to get the good grades and get the curriculum, but, you know, a theme that's coming through is that more often than not, you really don't use everything that you've learned, right? You're using it to get the interview and the job and the overall profile, but when it comes down to working, you really, right? I mean,
so I will say, I think the thing that fascinated me about the most about the 4 years I was there and working afterwards is it's really the relationships you have with the people when you work. Your ability to cultivate and maintain and have the integrity to manage the relationships is critical. So I think, you know, that's a little bit more of the soft skill side. I think for me in that role, I was a little bit more on the sales side. So managing those relationships was critical, right? The client could either come to me to do a trade, or he could go to another broker to do a trade. And part of why he came to me all the time was good relationships, right? He trusted me. I was honest. And so I think that was an important aspect. I don't know if that's something you really learned in class, but I'd say maintaining good relationships is important. And it goes hand in hand with teamwork, right? So I was on the sales side. I had my traders right across the desk from me, right? So had a client call me, would say, oh, Marin, I want to buy 5 million of these bonds. Here's what I'll pay. I had to go to the trader and say, here's what I'll pay. Is this a good price? What can you do for me, right? And so there's a little bit of negotiating directly with my trader on the other side if he held those bonds on the book. And so it was critical to be able to have that relationship with the trader to be able to do that. So having good teamwork was important too.
question?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Speak loud because he has to.
Hi. I would like to ask what kind of questions they will ask during the interview?
What kind of questions they're going to ask you during the interview? What kind of question did they ask you, if you remember? Or what know yourself when you're
Good. So good question. So the first round of interviews when I was interviewing for the commodity role, those are kind of like the standard questions about, oh, tell me about a time you did this, or tell me about what you think about that. I did have a couple questions where it was specific around, okay, well, what happens if the stock, if you have an option, if you have a call option and a put option, what happens when the stock moves, right? What happens to your delta? What happens to your volatility? So I did have specific questions with that. By the time it kind of came to the later rounds, when I moved to the sales and trading side rounds, it was really a get to know you kind of question. I had somebody, maybe the most interesting one I had. So this was, the person really wanted to better understand, they really wanted to test me on what I would think about on hedging a position. So I don't know about how many of you watch college football, but Ohio State was going up against Michigan State. This was in 2007. So it was like #1 versus #2 in the country. It was really big. The guy said, he was talking about how he had bet on Ohio State and then had like sold Michigan State. And he was asking, what's the ratio of bets I should put, what's a dollar value I should put on Michigan State versus a dollar value I should put on Ohio State to win the national championship for this. And so I'd go through and kind of like fumble my way through and figure out. So it was very much an analytical question, but also kind of couched in a way that, hey, is this a person, does he know what he's talking about? Does he understand what he's talking about? And is this a person I can relate to? So I got the direction of the hedge right. I got the numbers pretty screwed up, but person in the end didn't care. So those second round interviews are really much more conversational, right? If you're able to do the hardcore analytics, they probably figured that out in the first couple of interviews. By the time you get to the later ones, is this somebody we want to work with? Is this going to be a good team member for us?
Yeah, so you were talking about, because you were on the sell side, and then you're talking about the soft interpersonal skills, talking to someone. So just wondering if, like we're applying for something that's more related to bonds, quants, and all the pretty technical stuff, how would you prepare for those questions that you're talking about, like the analytical questions, instead of, like in the early round, instead of, just using your soft, nature skills of talking?
Yeah, I would say the early one, I mean, obviously be able to, I would say the numbers are less important than your ability to be able to talk through the problem, right? So if anybody's ever studied for like case interviews at the consulting level, the questions really come down to how are you thinking, right? So most people are trying to test how you're thinking. And so don't worry about fumbling through the numbers as much. It's probably a lot more important to be able to say, okay, here's the thought process I'm going through, right? And if they can follow along in your thought process about how you're thinking about things, they're more willing to help you out in the interview and help you understand. That's what they're really trying to hone in on is, hey, does this person have a logical approach to approaching this problem, right? So if they're asking you about hedging something, if they're asking you about specifically, what would you do in this situation type of thing, being able to logically walk through that approach, not just come up with the right answer, is probably more important. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Yeah, if you could, I would say if you're in an interview and they give you a problem, you come up with the right answer, but don't explain how you got it, that's not a good answer.
I see.
It's better to go, it's my opinion, it's always been better to hear the person talk through what they're thinking and come out with a bad number, but the right thought process, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
As long as they have the right thought process, they're not going to be that far off.
So where do you think the jobs are now? I mean, the program at that time probably was preparing you for hedge fund work, right?
Yeah. So it was a lot of hedge fund work. It was a lot of structured products. Mortgage-backed securities was huge then. So that was really big. The quantitative investing is huge right now. It was always big back then too, to some extent, but not as big. And so, I think that's where a lot of the jobs are going for. I've been out of the finance market for a little while now, just flipping around. Yeah, it's really mostly the quantitative analytics and stuff like that. that people are honing in on. Yeah, back in 2007, before kind of the Great Recession, it was very much the mortgage-backed securities and whatnot. How can you make a mortgage-backed security quadrupled, right? What's that, MBS to the fourth, right?
Yeah, so you graduated in 2007, and then so basically the market hits and all that, and then right now we're talking about there's another like pullback or recession coming. How does the industry and like hedge fund and also like quants related jobs are affecting, and then how should this kind of class react to that?
Yeah, so is your question kind of what the jobs are right now or how it's changing?
Like how like, because like '08 it happens, like how was it back then, and then how can we prepare things to like,
Oh, I mean, yeah. So I think on the quantitative investing side, it's just gotten stronger. The demand's gotten stronger since then. Again, I've been kind of out of the finance market for 6 years, so I'm probably not a great source of information on this. But everything I read in the journal and everything I see and everybody I talk to, friends that have gone into it, it's really being driven heavily by the quantitative investing is where things are going. I think if you look at the hedge funds that are opening up, I mean, investors don't really want to go with somebody unless there's a quantitative aspect to it, right? So most of the hedge funds are trying to push into there. I think so I went to the sell side, like you said. That's shrinking. A lot of it's going more electronic. I mean, convertible bonds is a little bit more of a different beast because there's a little more human interaction in terms of both. You typically trade. If you're working with a hedge fund, you typically buy the bond, sell the stock, right? To do a hedge trade on it. So it's a little bit more of a personal and nuanced aspect, but general bond trades, stock trades, I mean, that's going very much electronic. So, and that's just driving more quantitative interest on the hedge fund side. So. I mean, I think one of the things to take away though is that whatever job you get, always try to learn as much as you can, both from that job and then what everybody else is doing too, because you never know when that's going to be needed, right? For this career move. So while I wasn't on the investment banking side, I did try to learn as much as I could about when we had new issues coming to the market, right? How do they value them? How do they think about the companies? As much as I could do through the Chinese wall, right? Just trying to think about like what I could do to learn. And it's helped me in my career in working for a metals company doing consulting. So you never know where that information will come in.
Great. Gabriel, any questions? You good? Okay. Oh, Aman has a question.
You mentioned that you were able to move you to the sales and trading part because you had networked somehow over there. And we're much more like the early stages of that. So I wanted to ask you for advice on how do you ask someone for a job? How do you network in an email? What do you say? How do you go about it? What's a polite?
Yeah. So the first thing I'd say is never ask somebody for a job.
Yeah, right.
That would be the first no to do. Nobody wants to come up and say, "Hey, can you give me a job?" It's a good question though. So I have really rarely met somebody that actually enjoys networking. So if you don't like networking, you're like most people. What you really want to do though is if there's the first thing is really to find a company that you might want to work for, or if you see a job that you're interested in. But really, if there's a company you want to work for, try to reach out to somebody at that company either through one of your networks, through Lehigh. Or a friend network or something along those lines. LinkedIn wasn't really big at the time, but with LinkedIn, I mean, if you can get to a second degree person or a third degree person or have somebody introduce you, it's a great way to see what's out there. But really just having a conversation with them saying, hey, what's it like to work at this company? You know, what do you do? What do you see is growing in the company? And then you really get to the end of the conversation, you say, well, that sounds great. I do have an interest in working for this company. Is there anybody else you think I should talk to, right? So you're not asking for a job. You're really asking for, they want to see, I want to work for this company, right? For an example, I wasn't hiring in the finance side, but when I was working in the R&D department, I was managing 25 people. So we always had openings coming in the R&D area. And one of the key questions that I had when I was interviewing somebody or when somebody would come to me is, does this person really want to work for the company, right? And so there are instances where people weren't good fits for the role they were interviewing for, but they really showed a passion for interviewing for the company. And in those cases, right, even if the role wasn't a good fit, I knew the person wanted to work for the company and I thought they did an okay job in the interview, I'd look for other opportunities and recommend they apply to other jobs. So as far as networking goes, don't ever ask for a job, but always think about, hey, is this a company I want to work for, and kind of ask those questions. And use it as an opportunity to see if it's a job you want to do too, right? I guess maybe I'll give you one more story. Sorry, a little bit long-winded of an answer. But I interviewed for, I think it was HSBC, and it was in their structured mortgage-backed security area or something like that. And I did a first-round interview with the Lehigh guy on campus. Really good interview, really interesting. I went to the second round interview in New York, and I interviewed with 3 or 4 people. First interview went okay, it was interesting. Second interview was a little bit of a disaster. The guy was all about numbers, wasn't really very interesting. But at the end of the conversation, kind of talked a little about what the job did. And I just, in the back of my mind, I'm like, I have no interest in doing this job. And so I got to the third interview, and the guy, first question he asked is, why do you want to do this job? And I said, after these first 2 interviews, I think I've decided I don't want to do the interview, or don't want to do the job. It ended up being a great interview. I just was able to talk to the person, but I think from the other perspective, right? So that was a job I learned that I didn't want to do. The more you're able to network with somebody and better understand if it's a job you want to do, the better prepared you'll both be to get the job that's the right one for you, and make sure you don't do a job that you don't actually want to do. There's very few things more frustrating than getting into a job that you don't actually want to do.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
All right, if there are any more questions, we're gonna, okay, so thank you very much for
No problem.
We're probably gonna hit you with a couple of email, on LinkedIn, maybe some of them might want to share their CV with you in case there's anything that you think they could be interesting for them.
Yeah, no worries, absolutely. Great. Good luck, it was good talking, thanks for having me.
Thank you, and don't forget, we have a gift for you, so you gotta give me.
I always enjoy more Lehigh swag, so I'll take it.
You're gonna get,
Thanks, guys.
talk to you. Thank